Alright, welcome back to the Beanbag. We are going to be doing Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1. This is one where I actually have a lot more customs this time around, because they only did a handful of Season 1 characters, and they did a handful of Season 2 characters, which we'll look at next time. And what's interesting is the overlap of who did and didn't get made on which seasons and that kind of thing. So really only 5 characters got made for Season 1. To begin with was Captain Picard, which technically this is actually a customization in and of itself. For some reason, when they made this Picard, he came with the baggy pants like he had that he wore with his recreation uniform, his off-duty uniform, or whatever you want to call it. And so I actually popped these lower parts of the leg off in order to switch it with the standard uniform legs. So there was that one. Then there was Data, which this one again is a little bit of a customized one. I did use some of the same Data parts, but I didn't like the fact that a lot of the Data parts were actually reuses from the previous wave of the figures that they had made. They did do Troy in her maroon uniform, which was literally just a remake of the Season 5 sort of lavender color uniform. She wore it during Season 4 or 5, a little bit in 6. But that was part of the Wave 1 figures that they literally just redid the figure in the maroon uniform that she wore during the first couple of seasons. They did Worf, which the thing about this that's funny is he's technically wearing the wrong bandolier. They simply took this one from the later seasons and just painted it gold, which is actually quite inaccurate, but it still works. The head sculpt, though, his hair was nothing like this. A lot of people, they get this one and they actually will get the head sculpt off of the cadet version of Worf and switch it so that his hair and forehead look a little bit more like it did during the first season. That's something I'll probably do eventually. And then the last one that they made as part of the line was Tasha Yar. She was wearing the standard uniform here. Later on, we'll get to the 1701 version that has her in the later season uniform. But this is her in the Season 1 uniform. This is a great sculpt, and that head's actually really great for making a lot of other figures. Oh, I almost forgot. And Geordi, which I know I don't have his visor on him. I keep that in a special bag so that I don't lose it, because I don't necessarily want to glue it onto his head. So I just keep it somewhere so that if I'm actually going to be doing anything with it special, I can put it on and then I put it back in there in the bag. Which the Geordi was a really, really good one for the custom figure creators, is that we were able to reuse his body for a whole lot of stuff. In fact, you're going to see it here in a few cases for some of the others. So one of the first customs that I did was, as I mentioned, and I'll look at all the cadet figures that they made later on, but they did a Cadet Riker. But they never did Riker from the first season. So I took, this is actually, it's Picard, torso and arms, the later season version of Q, and then it's the Cadet Riker head, which has him clean shaven, that I stuck on there. And I'm actually quite happy with how that looks, because it looks pretty close to how he looked in that first season. Now, this is the first of many Chief OBriens in that first season uniform. He was in the first season, and really was only in the first few episodes. He was wearing the red. I want to say it was probably by about the 4th or 5th episode of the first season we saw him switch to the gold. But I keep the Goldie version of the uniform with the second season figures, which I'll show you next time. But this is basically, it's the Geordi figure and the Picard figure parts that I put a Chief OBrien head on. Next is one that everybody likes making. So you might recall in the first season, he appeared only in about 4 or 5 episodes, was Chief Argyle. And so what a lot of us do is that, if you recall, later on in the 90s, there was a little show called Sequest DSV. And the guy who played their chief of security on that show, his face looks a lot like Chief Argyle. His name was Chief Crocker. And so this is actually the Chief Crocker head that I had to cut the top of it off because he was wearing a baseball cap, and sculpt new hair onto it, and then I put it onto this body. And yeah, it makes me pretty happy to have that. But of course, in the second season, they did finally have Geordi become the chief engineer. Now, this is one that not many people ever actually make. This is a season 1 Dr. Crusher, which really all I did was I took the Dr. Crusher that's made from the season 3 and on uniform that came out in the second wave of figures. I popped her head off, cut off the collar, and painted the little green lines for that season 1 uniform, so that it looks more like that season 1 uniform. Because she did occasionally wear a lab coat in the first season. Not too often, and of course it was actually quite a bit longer, and it was a little bit lighter color blue than the one she wore in later seasons. But that's okay. Now, I am also a fan of the Star Trek comic books, and they actually did a Star Trek comic book that had Ensign Janeway, the woman who would eventually become captain of the Voyager, or I think she was lieutenant junior grade. It was when she became the science officer, and I cannot remember which ship it was now. But when she became the science officer on that particular ship, that's where she met Tuvok, who he was a security officer on that ship. And so this is basically, it's actually a Pulaski, which has the incorrect lines on the back. That's one of the ways you can always tell a Pulaski. Because it's not supposed to go up, it's supposed to dip down. Never understood how that mistake got made. Which, of course, we'll see that again in the next video when I look at the Season 2 figures. But, yeah, I took the Janeway head, cut off her little bun on the back, and then resculpted the hair to look as close as I could to the one from the comic book. Hopefully you can see it real good right there. Now, the next one is a sort of a two-parter that a lot of people like to do. Admiral Jameson. He was one of the famous sort of antagonists during the first season. And if you're not recognizing him immediately, despite the uniform, maybe this will help. I did custom build the chair myself. And he fits in just like that. And I'm actually quite happy with how this came out. It doesn't really have any detailing on the back. It's pretty plain. It's in the episode, I never really saw what the back looked like. You get a lot of really good shots of the front and the side, and the detailing that's on the side here, but never really get to see the back too closely. And I tried to emulate the little headlights that it had on it as best as I could. But yeah, this is actually it's the Admiral McCoy head, which was seen in the very first episode. And we'll look at that one later on in a different set of figures that I have. And I redid this body all around it to match the Admiral style uniforms from the first and second season, which I gotta be honest, I never really quite understood. I mean, I like the little flares on the arm, but why the shoulders were so radically different and it had this swooping thing going on, I never quite understood. Now, one thing I made not too long ago, it was something that a lot of fans complain about, that whenever, especially like the Lieutenant Uhura from the original series set was made, is that she can't sit down. So I took and I made a custom sculpt of figures with their legs sitting down wearing a skirt. And the first one, that's so far the only one I have made, is a Counselor Troy wearing the blue scant uniform from the first season in a sitting position, so that I can have her sitting on the bridge and looking nice and appropriate and all that. I don't have a chair, otherwise I would show that with the chair as well, but that's what she looks like. And it does still have a little bit of movement, the arms, collar, and that kind of thing, but she doesn't move from the waist down. It is all solid. But I'm quite happy with how that one turned out as well. So that's it for the Season 1 figures of Next Generation. Like I said, next time we'll look at Season 2. Thank you, and see you next time.